empty our refrigerators. They steal our sleep. They empty our bank accounts. They hurt our eardrums. Many see kids as a burden. But God sees kids differently. He calls them a gift and a reward. He is actively involved in creating them, protecting them, and providing for them. He loves each and every life brought into this world. Every child is unique and valuable, created in God's image. And He invites us to look at kids the way He does. For a few weeks, let's discover why God views kids not as burdens, but as blessings.
When you think about yourself or somebody else, maybe the person next to you, what makes them or you special? My name's Ron, and I just want to welcome you today, and I want to welcome those online that are joining us, as well as, why don't we give a welcome to those joining us at Hillcrest, at our Hillcrest campus. They're joining us via simulcast, so we're glad you're here. And I get the privilege of being the campus pastor here in Greene. So glad to be on the teaching team and be a part of this series. And so in this series, Children Are a Blessing, I just figured I had to introduce myself as more than a pastor. I'm a husband, and I'm a father of 4 kids. So take a look at my kids. They're awesome. Actually, I didn't think any of them were going to be here today, and then they surprised me, and they were all able to come. But this is Timothy and James, Karis and Sam, and we as a family, we just love to be a part of Berean. You guys are our faith family, and each one of them are involved in service, and we serve together as a family. It's exciting. A couple weeks ago, when we started this series here in Greene, I was able to share some of my story for my son James's birth. So it gave a little bit of insight into what it looked like as he was born. Very difficult pregnancy, difficult delivery. We were very concerned. And so I want to finish that story because it wasn't over. My little son James was born. And in that delivery room, we didn't get to hold him right away. He was whisked out of the room because his color was blue. He could barely breathe. His heart rate had been going down. We weren't sure what was next. We were scared as parents, and glad we had made it to that point, but we didn't know what the future was going to hold. And if you've been, if you're a parent and you've raised children, I don't know how old it is, but they give a health score to the baby as they're born, and then at intervals after birth, it's called an APGAR score. Anybody heard of that before? Some people. So you give an APGAR score. It goes up to 17 points. And so our James scored a whopping 1. And then he made it all the way to 3. And so he had some challenges. But through intervention and some good health care at the hospital, we were able to eventually take him home. But as young parents, we started to get the sense that something wasn't quite right. And as young, we weren't doctors, but our little baby James wouldn't cry. He just kind of looked at us in this straight look, and when he needed a diaper change, he didn't cry. When he needed to eat, or he was hungry, or we thought maybe he was hungry, he didn't cry. He didn't let us know. If he needed to wait, when he woke up from a nap, or he'd been in bed all night long, he wouldn't cry. And so we took that to the doctors on a number of different visits. What do we do with this? We think there's a problem. You know what the doctor said? He's easy. What are you complaining about? But as young parents, we couldn't get rid of this nagging sense, this gnawing sense in our inside, in our gut, that something wasn't quite right. And so James would go on to miss multiple milestones, and just a couple of those. He just started to develop his his muscles a little bit to start walking at 18 months. He started to be able to talk a little bit at 3 years old. And so he would miss milestones. But as we gave him help and as we gave him therapy and as we gave him attention, he would always make a little bit of progress. So well, he's moving forward. Maybe we're going to be all right. And when we hit preschool, so we're moving forward about 5 years, when he was entering preschool, our calm, quiet, easy child drastically changed. Drastically changed. He took a big backtrack in his development. And here's what we dealt with. You go into school all day long, and he was calm like James. But he was in an atmosphere with a lot of people and a lot of interaction, a lot of noise, and a lot of chaos. And he would come home, he would sit on the couch, he would bang his head and scream. Just couldn't handle it. He became uncontrollable. He became withdrawn. And our little boy, we realized maybe something wasn't quite okay. When he was overwhelmed, he would run away, he would flee, he would disappear. When he was overstimulated and stressed, he would implode. And his health took a downturn. He went backwards, and he went from a 5-year level back to an 18-month-old level. So I started out with the question, what makes someone special? What makes someone special? What sets them apart? What makes you different? In our world around us, there's all kinds of things that people think make them different, make them special. For some, it's amazing abilities. They can hone in on this. I'm really good at this one thing. Maybe sports, maybe academics, maybe something in regard to their career, their abilities, amazing abilities. For many people today, if they can build a social media following or have a viral video or everyone's looking at me, they'll feel special. For some, maybe it's I just need to graduate with straight A's. For others, maybe it's buying that sports car or that big truck or whatever they feel makes them different and set apart. But kids can't do any of those things. Little children don't have those situations. They're dependent. And what if you have special needs beyond that? What makes someone special? Maybe for some it's just fitting in. It's just being normal. But what if you're not? What if you don't fit in? I was reading recently about child victimization and right now in our time, 2023, you'd think that would be over, right? We could have gone past that. I think we're headed maybe a little backwards. Reading about child victimization just in this year, and Allie Stuckey from World Magazine, she makes this evaluation. She's talking about an event that happened this year, but she makes this evaluation of how people have viewed children in the past. And she looks at history and she says this: a low view of children has been the norm in many societies. It wasn't until Christianity emerged in the ancient pagan world that the view of children shifted. She says, shifted from objectification to appreciation, from exploitation to compassion. She says this: due to their physical weakness and likelihood of dying before adulthood, children were not valued, but were often used for labor and sexual gratification. See, children are dependent and they can't give back, so they've been easily devalued in our world. They've often been pushed down. And sadly, it's not over yet. It still happens in our society today. Our world often will define value by by what we can do, what we can experience, what we can share, what we can give back. That's what makes us valuable. But then what happens when our experience is no longer good? When we can no longer give back? When we lose the ability to take care of ourselves? What happens if our abilities start to fail? Do we have value? For many, what's happened in society is a low view of children is now being reflected as a low view of adults. We've taken a shift. And for many years, many European countries have been deciding value, and they have a word for it. It's called euthanasia. And it began as a decision between a doctor and a patient to end life in the case of a terminal illness, but it's moved beyond that today. But I just want to make a distinction. We're not talking about the choice to withhold treatment or to avoid extreme medical care. So that's not what we're talking about. Euthanasia is a conscious choice to terminate life. And I just want to make some examples here of what's going on in our world right now, where a low view of humanity is now reflected in a low view of our older and our younger, and those that have lost their ability. Just think about these couple examples. In the Netherlands right now, a doctor is able to end life without the consent of the patient or the consent of their family. So the doctor's able to make that choice. It doesn't look like a good prognosis. The doctor himself can end that. Maybe a little closer to home. How about in Canada? They did a recent poll to try and govern what's the attitude in Canada of euthanasia, what's the attitude and how people determine value. Here's a couple things that study found. 50% of the people in the poll believe that if treatment is unavailable, not that treatment's not possible, if treatment isn't available, that euthanasia is an acceptable option in a medical situation. They went on in that study. They went on and they looked at what about poverty? What about homelessness? And 30% of the people in the poll said that they believed euthanasia was an acceptable option to deal with poverty if you couldn't financially take care of yourself, or homelessness. That's how we can take care of it as a society. Belgium has taken the next leap forward and backwards. It's not forward at all. Belgium has decided now, and over the last couple of years this has been legal, to allow children of any age to decide for euthanasia in the case of a handicap or a debilitating disease. I know in our room right here, we've gone quiet. Maybe the tension is a little higher. And for many of us, these aren't the values we share, but this is the culture and the society that we are in. So what does determine value? We're in a world of population that's now grown over 8 billion people, and it's climbing. And many people are afraid of that number, and they're afraid that overpopulation, and afraid that we're going to destroy the earth around us. And so I don't think it's too surprising that people who are looked at as little value are now unprotected. So what about James? What about someone has a little different, some special needs? You know, we as parents, we began a roller coaster ride. We began a ride of how do we love this little boy and help him progress? And it was full of questions. We didn't know whether he would be independent someday. We did not know what the future would hold. We started a ride of parental failure, or at least that's the way we felt. Sleepless nights, ongoing tests, therapy. We learned what it meant to be on the autism spectrum, and we were very unsure about the future. So for today, where does that value lie? And what happens when life starts to fall apart? What happens when you lose your abilities or maybe your life expectancy? The world says human life is a burden. And if there's a problem, or if you aren't productive, or you no longer can take care of yourself, death might be the best answer. After all, we don't have room for you anymore. In a world of 8 billion, many wonder if they're really special, if they're really valuable. But God looks at it differently. God looks at humanity differently, and that's where I want to look today. If you'd turn with me or tap with me to Genesis chapter 1, very first book of the Bible, very first chapter of the Bible. So very first page in the chair Bible next to, in front of you, I'm going to be on page 3. And we're going to look at some of Genesis 1 this morning. If you need a Bible or you need an easy to read Bible, I'd love you to take that. We have those there for you as our gift. Genesis chapter 1. That's how it all begins. Verse 1, it says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." And as you go on in the passage, you realize that God spoke into existence. He created the light. He separated the light and the darkness. He created the day and night. God separated the waters from the heavens, and he drew together the dry ground, and he created the stars and the universe, and God spoke it into existence. And we're going to jump a little further into the chapter here. How about the fifth day? So God continues to create, and on the fifth day, verse 20, then God said, "Let the waters swarm with fish. Let the skies be filled with birds of every kind." He's filling this earth that he created. God is creatively making all of this beautiful life. And on the sixth day, verse 24, God said, "Let the earth produce every sort of animal, each producing offspring of the same kind." But when mankind came, when God created man, it was a little different. Look at verse 26. Then God said, "Let us make human beings in our image, to be like us." He says, "They will reign over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky, over the livestock, all the wild animals on the earth, the small animals that scurry on the ground." So God created human beings in his own image. And Genesis 2 will go on to describe the creation of animals and humanity, and it gives a little more detail, and it goes into a little more of the process. But this here is the biggest difference. It's the biggest difference that separates humanity from the animal kingdom. Right here. We were created in whose image? God's image. God's image. We weren't just created by God. We were created to be like God. We were created in his image. You see a little bit more of what this means in the next section. It says, "In the image of God he created them, male and female, he created them." We just think back to verse 26. God made a relational decision when he created man. In that verse it says, "Let us make human beings." It's a relational decision. And we can look theologically at that verse, but God is a relational God. Humanity was built for social interaction. Male and female, he created them. In chapter 2, again, it's going to go into a little more detail. And in verse 18, God says, man was not meant to be, somebody finish it, alone, right? We weren't made to be isolated. We were made for social interaction. And this book, the Bible, it's God's message to mankind. It's God's communication. He's spoken. He had it written down for us. And one of the things that comes out of this is we get to see a picture of who God is, but we get the offer to have a relationship with God. He built us for that. He built us to have a relationship with each other, and he built us to have a relationship with him. We are designed for that social interaction, relational. It's part of God's image. Verse 28 says, then God blessed them, and he said, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and govern it. And we continue to see God's image coming out here. Humanity, humankind, possesses God's creativity. He says here, be fruitful and multiply. Now, that's called procreation. Creating. We were meant to create. And I know that goes beyond procreation, but God made us to continue life. Just like he created life, we get a chance to do the same thing. We also get the chance to be creative in how we govern, how we live, how we handle our properties, how we handle our jobs and our careers, and we're built for this. He says here that we would fill and govern it. Well, God has given us authority to govern the earth for him, in his place, as his images. The verse will go on and it says, to reign over the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the animals that scurry across the ground. In God's image, humanity has leadership. It has oversight. And we can see that throughout our world today. We were called to tame God's creation, to take care of it, to steward it, and to carry that out as God's images. So in chapter 2, we find Adam doing just that. He's tending the garden. He's taking care of it. He's naming the animals. He's organizing God's creation. He's living out God's image. Humanity has the capacity for relationships because we're in the image of God. We have the capacity for language and leadership and creativity and what's one of the biggest expressions of God's character, love. It's how he's treated us in creation. That's how he gives us salvation. And we as humanity have the capacity to love just like God loves. We're given the capacity for morality, to do what is right, to have freedom, to make choice and will. These are qualities given to us, but they're not unique to mankind because we are some great, great creation. No, they are unique and they are special because God has shared some of his attributes with us. You see, all humankind, all human beings are divine image bearers. All of us, each one of us, no matter the struggle, we all carry God's likeness. We display his handiwork. We are like God. So what do we do with that truth? What do we do with that truth in a broken world? See, at the end of Genesis 1, God makes this evaluation. He says, it was very good. It was very good. And I look at the world and I say, so what happened? What went wrong? See, our world is beautiful and it's amazing. I love spring because the new plants sprout and the new life is created. And you see the fawn. My wife and I were looking at a picture of two fawns that thought they were hiding in a road, and they were just stopped and and still thinking nothing can see them, but they were an expression of new life, and it happens every spring, doesn't it? But our world is beautiful. It also includes brokenness and pain and heartache. And Jesus once made this statement. John chapter 10, verse 10. Jesus said this. He said, "The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy." It doesn't sound very good. He goes on to say, "I came that they may have life and have it more abundantly." That's why Jesus came. You see, in Genesis 3, you turn over another chapter, Satan came to steal and destroy. He tried to get rid of and taint and destroy what God had created. This first couple, they decide to follow Satan's deception. They decide to disobey God, and creation is forever marred. Our bodies, our relationships, our work, all gain pain and strife and difficulty. The things that we have to deal with. And that original image of God, it was marred, it was harmed. But Jesus came to give life and to give it more abundantly. What did he come for? To reclaim what was lost, to restore, to give back. Colossians chapter 1 says this about Jesus. Christ is the visible image of the invisible God. If we want to see what we were truly made to be, look at Jesus. If we want to get the picture of what God's image should be in us, we look at Jesus. There's a very well-known verse in the book of Romans 8:28. Some of you probably can quote it. It says this, it says, God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose for them. And in other words, God, he takes the broken and he actually works for good. So God didn't create the suffering. He didn't create the difficulties. He didn't create the hardships. That's all a part of a broken world because of sin. But God can take that and he can orchestrate it. And he can weave a beautiful tapestry and he can move it for good. But the next verse is the one that's lesser known. Take a look at what Paul writes next. He says, "For God knew his people in advance." He had this plan. He knows what he's doing. He says, and he chose them to become like his son. That's the good. That's what God's working for. That's what he's doing, and that's what he can take the broken and he work it together to help us become like his son. And as we become more like Jesus, we actually become more like what God intended us to be originally. More of that image of God so that we can completely live out the image of God. Just think with me for a few minutes. How did Jesus treat people? How did he impact people when he was on this world? So that gives us a picture into the image of God and how we can live that image out. I want to just think about a couple examples. Jesus was willing to accept others and love others and care for people that even society would push away. Think about the example of kids. In Jesus' time, kids were, they didn't want to hear them or see them. They were devalued, just like the quote that I mentioned earlier. But for Jesus, he says, don't push them away. In fact, he gave a quite a strong warning in Matthew 18 not to push kids away. And he said, let them come to me. Let them come. Let them talk to me. Let them be near me. And Jesus cared about kids. He actually says to come to me. Jesus says you got to come like a child, like the faith of a child. The society devalued kids, but Jesus brings them dignity. He brings them value. And Jesus was at one point in the middle of a great crowd, and a woman with a continuous bleeding came up and she touched him. Now, in their society, in their religious system, he should have walked away, because if he is touched by someone who is bleeding, then he has to then go and give sacrifice, and he's got to spend a time of uncleanness, and he's got to deal with that religiously. What did Jesus do? He drew in closer. He stopped. He looked. He talked and listened, and he cared for that woman. How about a situation where Jesus was met by lepers? Now, in their society, a leper's got to come by and he has to yell, unclean, unclean, and everyone else would have run away. Now, leprosy is a horrible disease, and Jesus could have received a disease, but how does Jesus handle the leper? He says, come, let me touch you, let me heal you, let me care for you. Everyone else is pushing you away. Let me care for you. Jesus once met a demon-possessed man, so pushed away by society that he had to make his bedroom in a graveyard. And everyone else pushed that man away and pushed him to the sides of society. And as Jesus came to him, he doesn't fight the demons. He doesn't harm the person. He doesn't push him away. He releases him. He cares for him. He shows him value as God's image bearer. And Jesus was in a society that hated tax collectors. Hated tax collectors. In fact, I think maybe the Roman world, not just the Jews, but the Roman world hated tax collectors. What do? They would they'd give you a number and overshoot it. Say the taxes are here, they're going to charge you this and pocket the rest in the back. They were cheats, they were lies, they stole. What does Jesus do? He looks at Matthew, a tax collector. He says, come follow me. Be my disciple. Be one of my closest friends. He looked at Zacchaeus and he says, let me come to your house. Let me sit down and eat with you. One of the biggest expressions of fellowship and unity. Let me spend time with you and your friends. And Jesus one day was met at a well by a Samaritan woman. And this woman was outcast to her own people, and she was an outcast to the Jewish people. But Jesus cares for her, speaks to her, looks at her face to face, and gives her truth that he hadn't given anyone else. He gave her the value that God created in her as his image. The very people that society was willing to get rid of, Jesus was willing to care for. So are we really unique and valuable? We live in a world of 8 billion and counting, where many people struggle to see their own value. They struggle to see that they are special. But scientists have actually done the math, and they've tried to figure out what are the odds of you being born you in your time, with your DNA, in your place, with your family. What are the odds that you would be born you? And here's what they discovered. 1 in 400 trillion. Each one of us are 1 in 400 trillion. That's how unique we are. That's how special we are. And God knew each one of us from before we were born, throughout our lives, and he had a plan and a purpose. And we are his image that he put here. You are unique. Our son James is unique. He's special. He's 1 in 400 trillion. And you know what? He's grown and he has surpassed our wildest dreams. His life has actually helped many people understand God's love and express God's love in a better way than I ever could possibly do it in words. But James has really found his specialness in his relationship with God. because of who God has created him to be. And he loves to write about that. And I just want to share one of the songs that he's wrote recently about his faith. Just a piece of that. This is James speaking. He says, I was running on a road that had no end, nowhere to go, no next step to take. A slave who was tied to my past. So hard to let go, so hard to forget, so hard to leave and never look back. Till I found you. He says, with your strengths, the mountains fall away. With your grace, the strongholds start to break. With you, I have the courage to face today. But if one thing remains, with you, there's forever and always. Later on, he writes, I want the faithfulness to see you make a radical change in me, to make me who you want me to be. I know you made me for a reason, and your grace is my reason to believe. You see, no matter what you're going through or you're struggling with, you are loved. You're loved by God. You're unique and you're special. And I've so many times heard the phrase, you're one in a million. Who's heard that? Both here and I know we've heard that, right? No, you're not. You're 1 in 400 trillion. That's what you are. That's what you are, and that's what the person next to you is. 1 in 400 trillion. Their ideas, their connections, their perspectives, their abilities, the knowledge they have and the opportunities they have. 1 in 400 trillion, they're special and unique, and God has created them right here and right now. Maybe to help you become more like Jesus. And how about you? God has made you right here and right now to help you become more like him, to help you be the image he intended you to be. And that image in your school, with your friends, at your workplace, with your family, in your communities, you're the only one that can do exactly what God meant you to do. To be exactly where he meant you to be, to interact and impact the people that he put next to you, and you're the only one that can do that. See, our culture says, if you're too young and dependent, you tie us down. If you're no longer able to produce or care for yourself, you drain our resources. But God says you are special. You are unique. You are in his image. And when we care for others, when we love others the way Jesus did, we express God's image. When we care for the vulnerable, like Jesus did, we express God's image. The very people in our society that are devalued, when we care for them, we give them the dignity and the honor that God created them for. And as we care for them, we show the image that God created us for. When we take time to stop and to listen and understand the people that other people dismiss, we demonstrate the image of God and we give them value. When we care about what is important to a child, we care about their passion and we get to know them, we give them the value that God intended for them. When we choose to speak encouragement, even to someone who's struggling, we give them value. When we faithfully show the elderly that they are a priority, we give them God's value. I believe we can be a place and a people where everyone's accepted and everyone's loved, where people are embraced, even those with challenges, maybe from birth, maybe from injury, maybe from no fault of their own, maybe from their own choices, but that everyone is embraced and loved. And as we do that, we express God's image. I know he'll change our heart in that process, and he's going to change the hearts of the people around us. As we reflect on that concept, as we just think about how can we live out God's image, I want you to see a story. And we're going to watch a short video as we close of a couple who said, we're going to live out God's image and we're going to express love even when it's difficult, even when it's inconvenient. We're going to be the image of God.